We are live, NFL Week 16 recap show, live initial reactions to all of the opening odds in NFL Week number 17. It is the Christmas edition of the Simple Handicap here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel, either December 22nd, late in the evening, or bright and early Monday, December 23rd. Either time you might be listening to this. Hopefully you're having a fantastic time. Hopefully your holiday season is off to a great start as well, and it's good to be here with you for another episode live on the channel. This episode, I'll do my best to get through the recap a little bit quicker because it is going to be a little bit of a condensed format, as this is going to act as the Wednesday live stream preview as well. We've got Wednesday games, we've got a Thursday game, we've got Saturday games. There's a lot going on this week, and next week is going to have some disruption as well. So kind of a messy next 2 weeks in terms of the schedule, especially with the big day Wednesday being the biggest holiday day for everybody watching. So there will be this live stream acting as a de facto Wednesday live stream preview, and then I'll be back later in the week with an update for everything happening. There will also be part 2 of the College Football Bowl preview with Eddie and John here on the channel. That date is yet to be determined exactly, but there will be an update. If you are subscribed, you'll get a notification for that on the YouTube channel as well. So a lot going on, but we obviously have the holidays. So first and foremost, hope everybody is doing well, and hopefully you're ready for the holiday season. It was a quiet week number 16 for us on the service. 1 release, 1 win on the Giants Falcons over. We got a great number on that one, as did everybody on the subscription side. If you are interested in joining for the home stretch, my guess is there's going to be 4 more releases as a minimum. You can head over to raspicks.com/NFL. I would encourage everybody to jump over and bet the last few games of the season with us. Paid releases now for the season: 43, 31, and 2, 58.1% on sides and totals this season from the paid service. So a good late season push, just like we had last year to wrap things up. I would encourage everybody to go over and check it out, raspicks.com/NFL for the home stretch of the subscription. I just saw the Tampa Bay Buccaneers scored to cut the game to 26-24. They're kicking off on the other side of the 2-minute warning. That was a very quick drive from Mayfield and the Bucs. Let me know in the chat as this continues to go on and how this ultimately concludes. We'll see if the Buccaneers can get a stop and possibly pull it out with a field goal down the stretch. Delaney is saying, need a Bucs win bad here, Adam. Well, I'm rooting for you. I saw there was an under rooting in the chat as well. I think that just got spoiled a little bit. We also see RW Forrest, TB, let's go. He's pumped up. Curious to see how this goes. Luke says, just want to stop in and say thank you for all the information you provide through the streams and the podcast. Everything is super helpful. Happy holidays. I appreciate it, Luke, very much. That's great for you to stop in. I'm glad you're enjoying the live streams. I'm glad you're enjoying the show. Ryan Roberts doesn't have it in the tank. Wish I could stay up for another hour, but it'll have to be a morning listen for me tomorrow. I understand. This will be up on the podcast feed for anybody watching on YouTube, on Apple, or Spotify after for you to watch. Coinbit says, thank you for doing what you do. Enjoy your holiday, and we'll catch you at the end of the week. Good to have you back for another show, and we'll see you definitely on the live stream later in the week as well. Elite Deed says, very odd to see you this late, as it is usually a morning watch. We did this last week. It worked out very well, just with the way things are going down the stretch schedule-wise and some of the changes, just moving times around a little bit. As we get to the end of the season and all these schedules are completely flipped upside down and messed up. All right, we'll do a little bit of a quicker recap, and then we'll spend some more times on the Week 17 games up ahead. We'll start off with Atlanta, 34, New York Giants, 7. Big story here, Michael Penix in as the starting quarterback for the Falcons. They get away with a dominant win, a dominant cover. Game day money comes back on Atlanta after money during the week was on the Giants from 10 down to as low as 7.5. Ultimately pushes back close to 10. In this, it was very one-sided. Dominant win for the Falcons, plus 1.3 yards per play, plus 0.55 in net EPA per play, nearly half, well, more than half a point better per snap were the Atlanta Falcons with Penix compared to the Giants. ESPN in the headlines had an article that said Penix nearly flawless in his debut. Recaps for The Athletic from staff reporters echoed the same sentiment. There's some noise in this. Now, when you look at Michael Penix's end-game box score, it's not overly impressive, just over 200 yards. Completion percentage doesn't look like it's going to blow you away. But there were 4 drops in total by Falcons wide receivers. And the one INT that he threw, I mean, it should have been a touchdown. Kyle Pitts catches it, turns, bobbles it like loaf of bread that he stubbed his toe on the curb coming out of the grocery store right to a Giants defensive back who ends up picking the ball off effectively and returning it back about 25 yards at the end of the first half. 7-point swing, certainly, but also a big swing in the stat line for Penix. These drops were also quite impactful too. So even though the box score doesn't look at his stat line as jumping off the page, it was impressive. And I would say that he was, the word they were using on the broadcast was poised. I think poised is a fair assessment considering he is a rookie quarterback making his debut in a must-win game at the end of the season. It didn't feel like that. It didn't look like that either. That part of that could be the Giants defense, certainly, which is atrocious. Part of that could have been the Giants offense as well, which was equally atrocious, making the Falcons look better than they actually are. I thought it was an impressive game from Penix, given the scenario and stepping in on relatively short notice. It was a Monday night game for the Falcons and not really missing a beat. Now, scoreline, you think about that 7-point swing, should have been a touchdown taken off. There was a missed field goal earlier in the game as well. So it's 10 points of offense taken off the boards for the Falcons, which was replaced by 2 pick sixes by the defense that added 14 points to the scoreboard too. So kind of offsets in that regard. It was great to get the over after this news burst out. I was driving on the highway. It was like 6:30 p.m. Pacific on Tuesday or Wednesday when the news was announced. And I pulled over, got in the group chat. I'm like, we got to get this out at 40.5. We got to go over. Thankfully, we did. And thankfully, it held till the morning. We're able to release it. So we get the win on this one. Barely, in a way. You have the 2 pick sixes, but a win and some late game positive variance, if you will, as always, well accepted too. So good debut for Penix here. Good win for the Falcons. Big 2 games down the stretch in the NFC South to decide the division. Detroit 34, Chicago 17. Wire-to-wire win and cover for the Lions. Led 20-0. Led 34-14. And then in the second half, really started to work some clock, took the foot off the gas, finish plus 13% net success rate. My takeaway from this game is probably different. I think everybody might want to look at the offense and how dominant it was. We saw a very fun clip with the fake fall and the fake fumble leading to the touchdown to Laporta. It was more than 450 yards of offense for the Lions. It was dominant. It was another game where Eberflus and his absence shows for the Bears defense. It was another struggle for a unit that continues to regress. I think the Lions' defensive issues that we might see down the rest of the season were disguised a little bit by how this played out, because the Bears finished with 6.5 yards per play and 382 yards of offense. I know they were playing from behind. I know they were playing catch up. I know the the Lions got a couple of takeaways as well, but some of these numbers for how bad the Bears offense has been recently look a little bit concerning. And obviously the injuries for the Lions defense have been much discussed, but I kind of had the eye on the game throughout the morning, was watching it in and out, and you see the clips and you see how everything is going. I look at the box score at the end of the game when I'm doing my recaps and write-ups on bettingtalk.com. I'm like, holy smokes. Like, the Bears offense was somewhat potent in this game. And to me, that's an illustration of some of the issues the Lions defense might have down the stretch with some of these injuries. So keep that in mind as you watch. That was my takeaway from this game specifically. Looks like the Bucs are getting the ball back with 1:50 left. Seems like Vita Vea made another play. Where are they starting? We'll sweat this one out collectively here on the live stream. Getting it back on their own 27. Field goal to win indoors. Going to need about 32, 33 yards to get in comfortable range. Hopefully they're able to put together a drive. Cincinnati 24, Cleveland 7. This was more lopsided than the scoreline indicates. And at 24-7, it sounds lopsided as is, but this was a burial. Bengals plus 18% in net success rate. That's number 1 so far this week of all games that have finished, plus 0.33 net EPA, plus 1.3 net yards per play. And this is actually a little misleading in that, because the Cleveland Browns gained more than 25% of their total offensive output on the long run by Jerome Ford. He also had a 23-yard run to add on to that. So 2 plays made up more than 32% of the Browns' total offensive output. There were 61 plays in this game for Cleveland that were just at a bottom, unthinkably bad level of offensive output on a per-play basis that were kind of masked a little bit by some of those big plays by Ford that made the box score look more significant than it was. This is a game, it's a bit of a rarity where you see Joe Burrow, quarterback number 1 in completion percentage over expectation. DTR, dead last so far in the week in completion percentage over expectation. So it was the best QB performance relative to expectation against the worst. That kind of leads into how one-sided and how lopsided this entire game was. Oddly, even though DTR has only made 1 start this season, the Bengals have picked him off 4 different times throughout 2 games as he played in relief of Watson in the first meeting between these 2 teams earlier in the season. Finishes with minus 0.22 EPA per play. And what makes that a little bit more damning for the Browns and DTR's possible future in the league, this is a Bengals defense that has been horrible all season, that has been getting teams over at just a crazy rate. And now the Browns play them under twice with DTR playing in the chunk of both of those games, in this game, the entire game. That's pretty damning for how bad he is, how bad this Browns offense is going to be. And if not for some of those big plays by Ford, this is a very one-sided and lopsided game. Bland forces fumble, call on the field, game over, 26-24, Cowboys win. How big does that McMillan catch, no catch, and Lewis interception look going over the goal line 2 series ago in the fourth quarter? What a killer there for the Buccaneers. That was a game where the Cowboys, took money all week. They couldn't get past Bucs 4. Cowboys getting bet. They're playing hard at home. We'll touch on that game in a little bit. Indianapolis 38, Tennessee 30. Big bounce back for Jonathan Taylor in this game. He said all week that he promised to make up for the mistake that he had last week. He certainly did it. The Colts finished plus 2.0 net yards per play, run for 6.7 yards per rush. Taylor has not 1, not 2, but 3 touchdowns, 218 total yards on the ground. The Colts finish overall with 335 yards rushing on the ground. This is a good Titans defense against the run that has now been gashed by the Commanders and the Colts run game in the last couple of weeks. My question is, where has this offense been for Indy all season? I think back to preseason when Richardson was getting time and they were showcasing what the offense could be. This was supposed to be it. Richardson only threw 11 passes in this entire game. After the pick on the first series, Steichen's like, hell with it. If we're going down how I want it. And it took 16 weeks for this offense to show through. I think back to September and into October and how willing he was to let Richardson be a passer in the games where he was healthy and how aggressive they were being. And Richardson was coming out of games with like 12.5 intended air yards per throw. This is what the Colts offense should have been for the duration of the season. I'm not saying they go off for 300 yards on the ground every game, but this style of play is what they are. And we saw it today. Now, some of this aided by Tennessee mistakes. Colts had 30 and 40-yard touchdown drives off of turnovers, so some short field attempts. But this was excellent play calling, I felt, from the Colts. It was great execution, and it played to the skill set of the players that they have on the field. Tennessee made it competitive late with a couple of big scores. What we saw from Mason Rudolph is not a whole lot different from Will Levis, but you get the chance of sustained offensive success. Mason Rudolph in this game finished with a 54% passing success rate against this Gus Bradley defense. There were times where the offense looked competent throwing the football, and we saw Chega Kwonkwo become a big part of the game, his career best game. He was non-existent in games when Will Levis was starting. So that was a big switch. The deep ball, the Ridley, was taken away a bit by the defensive coverage and all this cover 3 that Gus Bradley and the Colts play, which makes it tough. But with Rudolph, you still get a lot of bad that you get with Levis, but at least there's a chance for some of these numbers that you see at the end of games and the end of box scores. Obviously, far too little, too late for Tennessee. These two teams down the stretch, a lot of variance both ways, offense and defense. We could see some pretty fun finals the next 2 weeks, to put it lightly. LA Rams 19, New York Jets 9. Semi-misleading final, I would say, is my takeaway for this one. Not uncommon to Jets games, certainly. We've seen this so many times this year with Jets games, but this certainly wasn't a dominant Rams performance at all. The Jets outgained the Rams by 0.3 per play, 79 total yards, but the Jets were minus 8% in net success rate and minus 0.21 in net EPA per play. What they were able to stop and slow down, they gave back in mistakes and errors. And for the Jets, the errors in this game came from failed fourth downs and stalled drives and missed field goals. They stalled at the Rams 3 to end the first half on a drive that had 12 plays run inside the Rams' 38-yard line. It was the strangest drive that just dragged on for just seemed like forever as you were just watching the scoreboard tick up as the Jets were going down. Couldn't get it in the end zone. Stopped at 4th and 1 at their own 33. Stopped on 4th and 4 at the Rams 13, stopped on 4th and 4 again at their own 47. They missed a 49-yard field goal. It's just mistakes and errors and missed high leverage downs. It's the story of the Jets season. The Rams, by virtue of that, had touchdown drives of 21 yards and 33 yards following some of those turnovers to set them up and added a couple field goals on top of it. They were effective running the football with Kyren Williams. A lot of that had to do with the Jets not having Quinnen Williams in the middle of that defensive line. But again, it wasn't like that Pats game that I thought this could possibly be, where the Rams were just dominant for 4 quarters, opening everything up. It was actually a little bit sluggish at time for LA. And it's just another weird game for the Jets and a odd season for them, to put it lightly. Washington 36, Philadelphia 33. You want to say odd and weird? Well, here it is. This game was a mess. I'll try my best to decipher it. The main overarching story and problem in this game was that Jalen Hurts was concussed. Now, I think it's concussion number 2 for him this season. You might remember the clip with Van Pelt on SportsCenter where he was wearing sunglasses post-game. I can't remember exactly which game that was off the top of my head, but I remember the clip, and he wasn't making a lot of sense speaking. It seemed really off. I don't think that was fully reported and disclosed for what it was. This one certainly is. And now with the way that the NFC is shaking out at the top, I wonder if this impacts the Eagles going forward. Now, when Kenny Pickett came in, the offense was never the same. He came in with a 14-0 lead, and we saw late in the game where the Eagles have been so good as front runners this season with those leads in games trying to close it out. Eagles couldn't do it. Devontae Smith had the catch in his hands, wide open, untouched, inside the Washington 20. Commanders had 1 timeout left. Eagles could have kneeled out the game. He drops the pass. He's talking about how frustrating it was post-game. That was a killer drop. The Eagles could have got away with the win still amid the Pickett offensive struggles and overcoming the loss of the starting quarterback. Smith's drop was one of many contributing factors to why they didn't, but that was certainly in play for them to win. Washington turns the ball over 5 times to make this even more confusing, and they trailed by 14-plus points. And the significance of that is looking back in the last 20 years of NFL games, teams that turn the ball over 5 times or more and are trailing by 14 points are 3-205 straight up. Washington is now team number 4 in the win column of that stat. Jaden Daniels able to overcome it, leading long scoring drives. It was impressive to see the comeback. It was equally impressive to see the Eagles melt as the Washington Commanders scored touchdowns on 3 of their final 4 drives, 61, 87, and 57 yards to end up coming out on top with a big win that justifies a lot of that early market money during the week, which took out the 4.5s, which took out the 4s, and brought that number in. Carolina 36, Arizona 30. It's games like these, and I mean, the bet's not done. We've got 2 weeks to go, but you see the Panthers continue to fight, and you think about the Bucs game, think about the Chiefs game, you think about the Eagles game, you think about some of these other near losses down the stretch, and you see the Panthers continue to fight, and you just get a little bit frustrated with that win total and how that might ultimately play out. I know there's many people watching that have the 4.5. You need one of 2 down the stretch. We'll see. But this was an impressive game again from Carolina, who just continues to fight. They get out and lead 20-3 in the second quarter. Everything is clicking. The Cardinals Are they dealing with the flu that was going around the locker room pregame? Hard to say. Are they dealing with the climate conditions? What also was not really discussed and talked about a whole lot was Arizona treated this not too far off from how teams treat London games. They flew into Carolina a day early to get acclimated to the conditions and the time zone. You look on the map and it's kind of silly to think about, but it's hard when you see how slow the Arizona Cardinals started, not to think that it might have been a factor. Like, I'm laughing because it's such a soft thing to do for a team. And it looked like it mattered early in the game too, as again, Carolina gets up to a 20-3 lead. What was the full driving factor of that? I don't know. It's speculation. But when you see how they prepped for this game, how they altered travel and practice plans, how they had different walkthroughs on Friday and Saturday in Carolina, it's just really weird. Now, the takeaway from this game going forward the last 2 weeks, run defenses on both sides, brutal. And we saw James Conner, who got hurt in the fourth quarter, have a big game as expected and as we talked about on the podcast. And we also saw Carolina be able to run it with Chuba Hubbard, not only in overtime, but throughout the game. Both teams go for at least 6.5 yards per carry each and more than 205 yards each on the ground. Kyler Murray as a whole, underwhelming, minus 4.1% relative to expectation. And that, I guess, similar to Cleveland in a way against a really bad defense, kind of looks a lot worse. It won't rank at the bottom of QBs this week, but it looks a lot worse because of the opponent that they were facing. And so Carolina gets away with the win in overtime by 6. Win total still alive. Dave Canales tried his best with conservative play calling to give this back again, like we've seen a couple other times late in the game, but he gets bailed out in overtime with a drive. Minnesota 27, Seattle 24. Seahawks finish with 4 more first downs, 70 more total yards. We're plus 2% in net success rate, plus 1.2 in net yards per play, plus 1.0 in net yards per pass, plus 0.5 in net yards per rush. It was a clean sweep across the board for the Seattle Seahawks in counting stats, advanced stats, everywhere. The big difference, -2 in turnovers. Geno's interception set up a short drive field goal for the Vikings, which turned out to be the difference. And then penalties just exaggerated the mistakes. And it was costly for Seattle, who were called and flagged for 11 of them and forced against the team, one of which knocked them out of field goal range for Myers late in the fourth quarter with a chance to tie the game. The other was a 15-yard face mask on the drive prior, where the Vikings ended up coming back and taking the lead after Seattle led 24-20 late in the second quarter, the play before the big strike to Justin Jefferson for the go-ahead touchdown. Seattle just kept making mistakes, could not get out of their own way, and it was frustrating, likely as a Seahawks fan, to see them for the second game in a row not be able to use the home field to their advantage. Against the Packers, we saw guys come out for Seattle this week talking about how the resale of tickets to Packers fans took away that big home field advantage for Seattle. You could hear it on the broadcast last Sunday night. In this game, it's not like the fans were overwhelmingly Vikings fans, but it was the Seahawks, who typically play with such a strong home field, making the mistakes on the offensive line, procedures, false starts, all the issues that you usually see the visiting team make, which Minnesota didn't, were being made by Seattle. And that's something that's been kind of ongoing during the season and today. And the worst time when the Seahawks need the game, it shows up, especially on those final 2 drives, to cost them a chance at a makeable field goal, albeit it fell just short of the goalposts. And then that face mask on the 2nd and 10 sack instead of 3rd and 18 sets up a first down. And then the next play, the big touchdown to Jefferson to seal the game. As it's been all season, when Kevin O'Connell, Sam Darnold, Justin Jefferson, they need the big play, they go out and get it. And Minnesota stays alive, competing for the number 1 seed. Buffalo 24, New England 21. Pats go 58 and 91 yards out of the gate on their first 2 drives. They lead 14-0 late first quarter. Closes a 2-touchdown underdog. 28 points adjusted to the spread. Past that, just 2 drives. The rest of the game to go for more than 33 yards of offense. One of them ended in an interception in the Buffalo end zone. The other one ends in the final drive touchdown for Drake May and the Pats. Another late drive from a Patriots team in a fourth quarter where they continue to pad a lot of these offensive numbers. Impressive game from May. He continues to look better and better each week. I think as a Pats fan, you have to be frustrated he didn't start from week one. All of this talk about the offensive line and the issues that he was going to have behind him really negated as you start to see him really progress week after week and this offense come together. I thought it was telling post-game. He went up at the podium, defended Van Pelt, the offensive coordinator, defended Mayo, his head coach. Was the first real vocal stance that we've seen from him publicly. Took a bit of a jab at reporters as well. And so there's certainly locker room issues that we hear about every week for New England, but May taking on a really good leadership role down the stretch, which is probably going to keep him in this offense fighting. I know Pat's overs have been very popular for the last 5 to 6 weeks in the market. It's probably something that continues as that maybe negates some of the issues around vibe and concerns around that a little bit. Can't believe I just said vibe on a live stream, trying to ease in with the younger community. But that's a good summary of what's going on there. The Pats equal or better in total yardage, yards per play, net success rate, net EPA per play, and first downs. And this was all about New England turning the ball over 3 consecutive drives to start the second half. One of them is a fumble 6 return for the Bills. It wasn't a dominant offensive performance by Buffalo. They did what they needed, flipped the game, cooled down the Pats' offense after those first 2 drives, and set themselves up for a win. Josh Allen, a little bit of a scare with an elbow contusion. He says he's going to be fine. Came out, he was playing with a broken bone in his left hand for the majority of the season. Something that comes up seemingly every year this time of the year is Josh Allen dealing with some of those injuries. And today it looked concerning after the hit, but he was able to get through it and says he's going to be fine. You wonder now, with the Chiefs very much in control of the 1 seed, they can lock that up on Wednesday. And if they do we see the Bills take the foot off the gas a little bit, maybe let Allen continue his MVP push. But if this is now settled, you think about some of these offensive weapons that have been banged up, including Josh Allen, you might see a little bit more inclination to rest in week 18 than we might have expected a week or 2 ago. Not a whole lot to say here. I didn't even put Las Vegas, Jacksonville on the banner. Vegas 19, Jags 14. Raiders were celebrating owner, coach, players, post-game for the win, following the game in the locker room. I don't get it. In one hand, you want to say teams have to go out there and intentionally lose, get the number 1 pick. I get it. I can't disagree with that logic. I think it's a lot easier said on Twitter than it is done inside a professional locker room and a professional team. It's hard to put on the tank collectively and just buy into that. And we saw the Raiders players celebrating with ownership and coaching staff after the game, despite knocking themselves out likely of the running for the number 1 pick in the draft. Raiders were plus 13% net success rate, plus 0.7 net EPA per play. They would have won the per play battle as well, but Thomas's 68-yard touchdown offset some of those numbers, made it look a little bit better for Jacksonville than it actually was. There were 2 turnovers for the Jags, but neither led to points. Not much to say in recap of this game whatsoever for me. Miami 29, San Francisco 17. This is one of these games that I feel like we've seen way more often than usual this season. San Francisco was bet, I don't want to say blindly. There was obviously intent behind it. But, I mean, they were just smashed in the market all week. It was a 4.5-point move. There was no buyback on Miami at all. And while it was a one-score game and competitive for a chunk of the first half, the 49ers, despite receiving all of this money all week and this line moving like crazy, in seasons past, that indicates this is very likely a runaway for the team. And you saw this so many times come through and back up the movement in the market. The 49ers never led in the second half of this game. And this, to me, is something that we've seen so many times this season, a bit out of character. These big moves that are kind of unopposed all week just have had so much trouble getting to the window. And this is another one. This game, very much about 49ers mistakes, 49ers injuries, 49ers missed kicks. It's just what it's been for them the entire season. They lost 2 more starting offensive linemen. Purdy was under duress all game. hit 6 times, sacked 3 times. 49ers were flagged for 15-yard late hit penalties 3 different times. They were flagged twice for formation and procedure penalties, which set up and took away offensive scoring opportunities. One of them was inside the 5-yard line. Another one was right outside the red zone. So just more back-breaking penalties, more back-breaking mistakes. The game, even amid all of this, the Niners not leading, the Niners making the mistakes, the Niners having the injuries on the O-line, 22-17 late. Miami was in control. The 49ers could have got the ball back with very little time on the clock. 22-17, but Achane rips off a 50-yard run, elects not to go down, runs into the end zone. It adds 7 points on the scoreboard, gets the total over the closing total for the celebration of many watching, rooting for the over. And that kind of padded the score a little bit. But other than that, it was a relatively clean game from Miami and a very messy game from the 49ers, which has been the story of the season all season long. Elite Deet says 11 penalties for 90 yards killed them. It definitely did. First and Goal checking in. Good evening. Good to have you back for another live stream as well. Lots of questions about the Week 16 opening lines, which is where we are going to get to right now. It's Week 16 recap, Week 17 opening lines. Again, guys, before we get to this, raspicks.com/NFL. If you want to go down the home stretch with us, we should have at least 4 more releases now into the playoffs as well on the subscription, up to 58.1% on paid releases this season. If you'd like to join, it's prorated down to $100 for the rest of the season if you want to join in for the last handful of releases. So if you want to head over to raspicks.com, chance of one tomorrow morning. We'll see how these numbers play out and what we get for availability. Keep that in mind and would encourage everybody to go over to raspicks.com/NFL. If you are watching on YouTube, just double check something for me. Right below should be over here somewhere on your screen. If you're in bed maybe and you got the phone down on the bedside table, pick it up. Just do a check for me. Just see right below the video if you are in fact subscribed to the channel. I reminded everybody of this last Sunday on the live stream, and there were a few comments that said, been watching for months and years, and I didn't realize I wasn't subscribed. If you're not subscribed and you want to hit that button, it's free to subscribe to the channel. You'll get notifications as we go through the next couple of weeks with an altered schedule and different live streams at different times. You don't miss anything. Would appreciate it if you do that. And if you already are, there is a thumbs up button. That would be great if you hit that as well. Helps boost the video up, improve the reach. A lot of comments in the live chat saying how they're enjoying the shows, enjoying the info, and getting a lot of value from it. If you are, hit that thumbs up button. It helps out my shows, helps out the channel as well, and gets us to a bit of a bigger audience too. If you're on Apple or Spotify, I would love it if you're able to hit subscribe as well, listening to the show as well. All right. Week 17 opening lines. And I do my best, honestly, to make these true reactions to everything that I see for the first time. And this is very much that. It's been a long day of going back and forth. Again, it wasn't a huge volume day for us. We just had that one total that won. And so it was just a lot of watching and a lot of figuring things out. I'll illustrate the playoff picture the best that I can as we go through who needs what, how we're looking. And so if you have any questions about that as we go, just put it in the chat and remind me, and I'll get to it. So game number 1 that we see on the card Wednesday morning, Kansas City on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Chiefs were a 1.5-point underdog on the look ahead, 2.5 points now currently on the point spread and trending up slightly. Now, when we're looking at that 1.5-point number on the look ahead, that was posted on December 17th, which was Tuesday. And a lot of places that posted numbers on that look ahead did not know the status of Patrick Mahomes, which was determined later on Tuesday when things became official. So there's some noise in that look ahead number. When it comes to playoff implications, Kansas City secures the 1 seed with a victory. Pittsburgh currently has the tiebreak over Baltimore for the division. They're equal head-to-head, but the conference tiebreak goes to Pittsburgh. So there's obviously a lot of need for them to win. Both teams have to win this game for something. This is not either team locked in. Pittsburgh injury concerns are the first thing that comes to mind when handicapping this game, specifically on the defensive side. George Pickens has basically been said to be in based on what Mike Tomlin has said today, where he has a real chance of playing. I think you can expect George Pickens to be out there. The question is on defense for Pittsburgh, what are we getting? Because we saw Joey Porter Jr. go down. He is incredibly important to this secondary. Deshaun Elliott, Dante Jackson also in the secondary, Larry Ogunjobi on the defensive line as well. So 4 key injuries to watch out for Pittsburgh, in addition to the George Pickens injury. I think those are quite important. I'm also curious what we see from the Chiefs' offensive line, as they had to end the game with Wanya Morris at right tackle, and they obviously have Joe Thuney kicked out from left guard to left tackle because of the injury to Jawan Taylor. We'll know more about that as Monday goes on. As I just kind of think about this handicap and this matchup in general, if this is a Chiefs offense that has issues at left tackle, issues at right tackle, and you're telling me that the Steelers' defensive front 7 is fully healthy and everybody is back, that to me is a mismatch up front. The Texans, to an extent, were able to exploit it. The Chiefs ended up going with targets and receptions to 8 different guys, spread things out. Kansas City was able to pick up a lot of those third downs they've been exceptionally well at doing all season. This is a different animal on the road at Pittsburgh relative to what they faced in the Texans, who lost some key names in the secondary. Jimmy Ward and others went down earlier in that game. And so if you give me a healthy Steelers defensive secondary, you give me a healthy defensive front, and you tell me that Pickens is back, I think this plays out a lot tougher than it might be listed initially for the Chiefs. I can't say I have an opinion at 2.5. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of injuries here to watch for that I think are going to be impactful. And so nothing for me at 2.5 or 43, which is a total that's been bet up about 2 points. The only way that you could really look at the over here is if you're very confident that Pickens is going to play. You're going to need him out there for the Steelers offense to have much of a choice. I know defensively against the Ravens, they really struggled, especially against the run game. But again, if that Chiefs O-line is banged up, I don't know if they're going to be as effective as we saw them be against the Texans on offense. Rudy says Mahomes less than a field goal is tough to go against whatever the setup is. Luke Burrow says only paying 1 point for Mahomes. Go get that spread. Lots of KC sentiment in the chat so far. Luke Burrow also says, great show. I appreciate you being here as well. Rudy Barron says, I just recently subscribed to all the shows and podcasts I listen to. I didn't know how much it actually helps them out. It really does. It really, really does. There's no doubt about that. So lots of injuries to watch for Kansas City and Pittsburgh that would have me on the fence yet. But the way that this number is trending certainly looks like there is a chance this touches 3. Baltimore on the road at Houston. So Baltimore does not have the tiebreak currently with Pittsburgh for the division. They're going to know, obviously, what happens with Pittsburgh as they play after. Houston, semi-locked in, guaranteed a home game. They've clinched a division, game back of improving their seed, but they need a lot of help down the stretch. And as I mentioned, the injuries for Houston become concerning. I think losing Tank Dell was massive. We saw the offense with him out really start to struggle. Shaq Mason left the game. Right guard did not return. That could be a big issue as well. What are we getting from the status of Jimmy Ward in the secondary? He's a very impactful player to this scheme. At the nickel role, he's been vital at times. And you think about the Ravens and how multiple they can be and move guys around, certainly able to attack certain parts on the field very well and isolated in matchups. Again, names here that I kind of keeping my eye on. The big thing for me that I saw from the Ravens defense against Pittsburgh at times looked much improved against the run, but at times really struggled to get off the field. Some timely interceptions late. But again, the big concern with Baltimore for me down the stretch is the defense and what level of play are you getting out of them. We saw improvement the last 5 to 6 weeks, but against the Steelers, there were some drives where there was just zero punch that you typically expect from the Ravens defense. And I thought it was very, at times, underwhelming. Second half, they tightened it up. But what do you get out of Houston in a comeback game without Dell? His impact was clear. Like, I've never seen guys let alone a starting quarterback, in tears on the field, like we saw with C.J. Stroud. And once Dell was out, that offense continues to struggle. That offensive line is a problem up front. C.J. Stroud and some of these jump passes he was throwing, it just seems all so unsettled. And everything about this, with the Ravens off the win and the Texans off the loss and this back at home in Houston, spot-wise, makes me want to look to Houston. But I don't think that I could comfortably get there even at 4, where this number is adjusted and now bet up from 3. I struggle with that. I think there's a lot more here for Baltimore. I think Houston, I don't want to say that it's like foot off the gas and coast again. They have to figure out something on offense, but I mean, they're not improving from where they are unless you get serious meltdowns from Baltimore and Pittsburgh down the stretch the last 2 weeks and everything falls the way for Houston. And even so, there's not a lot of upside there. They've got to figure some things out on offense. But to me, that loss of Dell is certainly impactful. Now, Collins has been much better against zone coverage historically throughout his career with C.J. Stroud the last 2 seasons. We saw last week against the Chiefs defense that was playing a lot of man. Wasn't a big impact player. The Ravens certainly should be able to match him up in a similar way. And so without Dell as a second option, like, what's the ceiling here for this Texans offense? I don't think it's very high. Next game up, Thursday night football, Seattle on the road at the Chicago Bears. So here's where we start to get into some of these games. We see them all the time down the stretch, week 17 and 18, where you have the premium put on the team that needs it and a discount put on the team that is playing effectively for nothing. This is the first one we've seen. No matter what happens on Wednesday, this game will matter. So it's not a case of results coming in and then incentives changing. Seattle has to win to continue staying alive in the playoffs. They have the Rams on deck next week. If they win and the Rams win, it sets up a Week 18 game for the division. Seattle has to win, and ideally they would have help. But the Rams do not play until after this game, and so no matter what, you have Seattle playing with the season on the line. The Chicago Bears, obviously a dead team, and they're out of it. They have nothing to play for. There is a premium put on this. Now, for those of you who might be new to the podcast or you're new to betting and you hear these things of must win versus nothing to play for, recently, over the last 5 to 6 seasons, the team that has nothing to play for is always the team you want to look on to see if there is a way to play them, because teams are struggling to cover the premium that is put on them from the must-win factor. We have not seen this nearly as effective as it once was a long time ago. And so I'm bringing this up more as a reminder to say, how can you look at the team that has nothing to play for at a bit of a discount, rather than saying, go and look at the team that needs it and bet into that? We're seeing big premiums on these teams, and we're seeing them this week. And Seattle is certainly one of them, adjusted up to 3.5. The Bears defense without Eberflus has regressed in a big way. It was struggling since the midpoint of the season, and that's been a big issue. And so for Seattle going out, they're going to go down throwing the football. They're going to be aggressive. This is not going to be a conservative game plan going into Chicago. The Seahawks are going out with Geno Smith throwing the football for better or for worse. Against this Bears defense, a lot of signs that it could be for the better. And I start to think about some of the profiles these games took on last year, where there's these desperation spots with totals and how they've typically profiled as overs the last couple of weeks of seasons, especially when you get the spike in pass rate over expectation. Geno today threw it more than 40 times in that game against the Vikings. Even with Kenneth Walker back, even with all the calls to run it early in the game, they elected to use Walker as more of an outlet to replicate the run game rather than run it traditionally. So you know what you're getting from Seattle in this game. The question is, can the Bears be a suitable over partner? They lost 2 starting offensive linemen in the game today against the Detroit Lions. Jones is done for the year. It's unclear if Jenkins is going to be able to come back. And this is a Seattle Seahawks defense that can be very aggressive up front. and generate a lot of pressure. We've seen both of these two teams close at 43.5 in recent weeks against Minnesota. Now they are below that with a current total in this game of 42 playing each other. This, to me, and the total all comes down to, can Chicago get protection? Because they did put up 6.5 yards per play against the Lions. I think that's a little bit underrespected. But can they get protection enough to do their part of the total? I think is the big question in the handicap, and one that has to be figured out. So, again, another game early in the week. We're talking Sunday evening. It's a lot harder than Wednesday morning when to have kind of guesses, because we haven't even heard the day after statements on some of these players. So it's just speculation. I think the Bears probably play this game without two offensive linemen, and we see an equally aggressive Seahawks defensive game plan to match their aggressive offensive game plan that is going to be on display. The LA Chargers on the road at New England on Saturday. Not Seattle. Chargers on the road at New England Saturday. Chargers 5.5 point favorites across the board. Total 42. Total from 39.5 up to 42. We talked about Pat's overs and how popular they have been. There's certainly is being bet already, like it is another one. 6 down to 5.5 from the look ahead to current. This is the only need to win versus nothing to play for game of the week, and really the first one I can remember in a long time where there's not a premium put on the team that needs to win. We are seeing the Chargers adjusted down 0.5 point. They're more or less locked into the 6 with a win. They can possibly get up to the 5. But here's why I think this game matters maybe more than it's being labeled to based on the playoff picture. If the Chargers can stay where they are and avoid the 7, they avoid an opening round playoff game against the Bills, which is the way that the AFC playoff picture is looking. I think that that's significant. And I do think that there's a willingness to try push up, and hopefully you get the Steelers stumble down the stretch and you do seal the 5 to possibly avoid going to Kansas City the week following that in the division round. And so the 7 seed in the AFC is going to get either, if the Bills are able to pull off and the Chiefs stumble, or either way, you get the Chiefs or the Bills round 1 if you end up in the 7 seed. And so with the win against Denver and getting the tiebreak, I think there's still real incentives for the Chargers to get out and play and get a win to avoid that first round playoff matchup against probably the Bills, which nobody wants to play. So with that said, I'm a little bit surprised to see the premium come the other way. But as we talked about the Pats, you're seeing may improve. You're seeing this team be very competitive late in games, a top 10 fourth quarter team in EPA per play since May took over. They don't lie down late in games. So that's playing into this as well. We also see the Pats as 2 touchdown underdogs hold a 2 touchdown lead against the Buffalo Bills, where the Chargers needed to come back late against the Denver Broncos. There's also injury concerns at running back, somewhat at quarterback for Herbert, although we put some of those to rest. And so kind of contrasting scenarios there. It's a little bit surprising to see the gotta-have-it team not get put at a bit of a premium. Cincinnati hosting the Denver Broncos. Bengals 3-point favorites now across the board, total from 47.5 up to 48.5. So we talk about these games profiling as overs when there's desperation. This is kind of exhibit A of that. However, there's questions that come with this. So Denver clinches a wild card berth with the win and effectively locks up the AFC playoff picture. Very likely Denver's locked into the 7 and is going to have the misfortune of likely going to Buffalo, where they are going to get absolutely bludgeoned. But still, competitive game for them here. Cincinnati still alive in the playoff picture, has to win out. They need a lot of help. This is a massive game for them, as Denver is one of the teams that they need to get ahead of, and would go a long way for setting up an interesting scenario where if the Chiefs were to win on Christmas Day, they're most certainly going to be sitting guys in Week 18 based on Mahomes' comments, which would open the door possibly for Denver to win that game to keep Cincinnati out of the playoffs. If Denver were to win this game, you know that the Chiefs would obviously prefer to have Denver in the playoffs and not Cincinnati in the playoffs. So there's a lot kind of at play here when you think about this game and the result of the one the day prior, or at least 2 days, Saturday game, the result of the game on Wednesday, where obviously these teams are going to know what happened with the Chiefs and if they were able to win at Pittsburgh. If the Chiefs lose at Pittsburgh, that makes this even a little bit more interesting for the sake of the Denver Broncos. Needless to say, both of these teams have to have the game. We've seen the total already bet up slightly. The Bengals have seen every game but Browns games willingly fly over the total, and 2 of those Browns games had DTR playing for at least 2 of the quarters, or in the case of yesterday, the entire game. Good reason why some of those games are being bet under. Don't agree with a lot of these other Bengals games that have been bet under in other weeks. This game being bet over early. And I actually wonder a little bit about it. Like, I'm hesitant to just look at this over and play it because, as they give a long-winded answer and setup to this, the Cincinnati Bengals are likely to be without both their left and right tackle. We saw Mims go down in the game. They're already without their left tackle. You now have a tackle problem for Bengals offensive line that has been hanging on for the majority of the season. Burrow's been playing amazing, but this is a much different test against the Broncos defensive front that's very aggressive, brings a lot of rushers, and gets a lot of pressure. So that could be a tough matchup for the Bengals offense if Mims is unable to go. That's a massive loss. Once he went out against Cleveland, the offense looked, I don't want to call it non-functional, but it was visibly different against that Browns pass rush. If he does not play, the Broncos certainly have an opportunity to disrupt this game up front on that offensive line. I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing this number come in. It was 3.5 a little bit earlier today. We're now down to 3. I think it makes a lot of sense. When you think about the other side of the ball, what do the Broncos do well? The answer is run the football. What have the Bengals defensively struggled against all season long? The answer is almost everything, but specifically they struggled defending the run. Bo Nix has looked like a competent quarterback in the NFL when his offensive line can protect, dictate the game, and they can find success on the ground. Against this Bengals defense, I would expect there to be an opportunity for the Broncos offensive line to control the game, and that sets up things well for Nix. And we've seen the Bengals get worse offensive units than the Broncos well over the total at times this season. So there's reason for me to see how on that side of the ball, the over becomes a little bit appealing. It's also reason to me to see why the Broncos have been bet in a little bit. Oddly, in my opinion, at such a high number here, the driver of this total is going to be the Bengals and Joe Burrow behind that offensive line, which really hasn't been a concern all season long. I think it's a very tough matchup for them if Mims is unable to go and you're dealing with backups at the left and right tackle position against this Broncos defensive line. Arizona on the road at the Los Angeles Rams. From 3.5 for the Rams up to as high as 6 currently at Chris. So simple here. You have a gotta have it against the Cardinals team that was just eliminated. You're seeing nearly a field goal of premium put on the LA Rams in this game. As mentioned, they have the game week 18 on deck against the Seattle Seahawks. They will know what Seattle did before they take the field as Seattle plays on Thursday Night Football. So they're going to have an idea of what's happening. If you see Seattle win, this is a number that's probably going to hold. If you see that game go the other way, I don't think you see a sell at this number, but I do think you're not going to see it potentially tick up and go further. Another thing that's going to have a big impact on this game is the status of James Conner, who was dealing with an injury in the fourth quarter, ends up leaving the game, not coming back. And for Arizona, you take James Conner out of the backfield and you're way too reliant on Kyler Murray and a Marvin Harrison Jr. rookie wide receiver who cannot find separation and cannot win jump balls. And so without Conner, which is something we haven't seen for any meaningful amount of time this season, you are looking at an Arizona Cardinals offense that is very much compromised. When I saw this number at 6, my first thought just now was, how do I get to Arizona in this game? Because the Rams' performance at the Jets, I mean, it certainly wasn't warranting any excitement and any sort of upgrade. And I could say the same about Thursday night against the 49ers. So it's now back-to-back weeks for the Rams where it's been very underwhelming in terms of their win and their box score. And now they're getting a 3-point premium because of the playoff scenario, and you have a Cardinals team that's dead. But if you don't have James Conner on the field, I would struggle to find reason to why I could go out and back Arizona in this game without their absolute key weapon on offense. And so that is a huge, huge factor in this game, obviously, that needs a little bit more news, at least tomorrow and Tuesday, before making a decision. Sunday games, Indy on the road at the New York Giants. Woof. I tell you guys, for the Giants, that is as dead of a team as you can find. And if this is a Colts offense that continues to operate like they did against the Tennessee Titans, we saw the Falcons comfortably run the football with both of their backs. This Giants team is going to have a hell of a time trying to stop the Colts rushing attack with Richardson and Taylor. Does Steichen stick with that game plan? You would certainly hope. This is obviously a game where the Colts need to win to stay alive. The Giants eliminated, and very much with other incentives to try to stay with the number one pick, which they are in control of. This game from 6.5 up to 7.5. I don't think it's as much of a premium being put on the Colts as it is an equal downgrade of the Giants further. Drew Lock, watching him on the sidelines and his attitude and visually seeing the body language, very, very, very uninspiring, to put it lightly. And some of the decision-making he is making is awfully poor. This seems, again, kind of like a hopeless matchup for the Giants offense, and they clearly have focuses elsewhere rather than trying to win. They are now rated, at least coming into this week, a full 2 points worse than any team in the league the last 3 years. That's likely to be adjusted down further. And so this number could probably take off a little bit, and especially so if either the Chargers or the Broncos, two teams who play prior to Sunday, end up losing. If the Chargers and Broncos both win, the Colts are out. And so the Colts will know their fate before they take the field, and I could see an impact on that number if we think about either of those two teams losing outright to keep the Colts alive with the early kick. I think that's something that could come into play for the number. But, man, watching this Giants team is just painful. I mean, I watched almost the entire Falcons game live, snap for snap, and it's like I think about how bad Houston was 2 years ago and the Panthers were last year. This week I was kind of questioning, like, are the Giants that much worse? The answer is comfortably yes. It's a resounding yes, the way that they're operating right now. I mean, there is nothing out there. Atlanta on the road at the Washington Commanders. Commanders from 3.5 up to 5. Total from 46 up to 47. Michael Penix making his first road start. We are seeing both of these two teams with Atlanta fighting for the South. Washington still win and in for the wild card spot, which would be a massive success for their season. So it is another game where you have both teams with incentive to win. It is not necessarily an elimination game, but just by virtue of switching quarterbacks, you're going to have Atlanta willing to be a lot more aggressive. Now, even if Atlanta goes conservative in this game, I think about the Commanders' defense and how many issues it has had stopping the run all season. Atlanta, if they happen to go conservative, Bijan and Algier against this Commanders' defense is going to rack up yardage and is going to score points. So the conservative path here is all positive in some ways for Atlanta. The aggressive path, if Marshawn Lattimore misses, he left the game with a hamstring injury on Sunday, you're probably expecting success. Now, the big question is Drake London going to be able to play? He leaves the game with a hamstring injury. His status is going to be uncertain. If he's out there, you would think Atlanta, as a 5-point dog with a rookie quarterback on the road against this defense, is going to be able to make up their share of the total. Washington on the ground should definitely have success moving the football. Everything about this lines up pretty well for an over at this number, but if wide receiver number 1 for the Falcons is out, do you really want to go over 47 with a rookie quarterback starting on the road and an indoor team going outdoors into less than ideal weather. Nothing severe in the initial forecast, but certainly not an indoor dome game for the team. Something to probably consider and might be a bit of a deterrent at that price. Las Vegas on the road at the New Orleans Saints. Saints, 2.5-point favorites on the look ahead, not fully available yet. Those will be two dead teams playing against each other. Tennessee on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. 1.5-point favorites are Jacksonville. We're seeing one at Chris. We're seeing Circa open the other way. Tennessee -1. Total from 38. 39.5 at FanDuel, and DK 40 at Chris and Circa. So I would expect those 39.5s to be taken out and get to 40 like we see at Chris and Circa, just by virtue of Mason Rudolph taking over for the Titans and the variance that he brings. We saw him being a willing passer, 54% success rate on all throws for him in that game against the Colts defense. He's going to get a ton of man-to-man coverage in the Jags. We saw the Raiders comfortably move the football. There's just so much variance with this Titans team. If you told me you're getting the defense we saw today on the field and Jacksonville is going to have a chance to run the football on them, I mean, you can make the case the total is quite a bit too low. If you're telling me we get this Titans team that at times this season has just been dominant against the run, well, my hope and my expectation for Mac Jones outside of one or two deep passes to Brian Thomas, it probably is not very high. I have a hard time figuring out what kind of Titans defense we're going to get. I just have a feeling these totals in the high 30s are going to get taken out. And we're going to see this number move up just based on the Tennessee Titans and their offensive changes last week coming into this week. New York Jets on the road at the Buffalo Bills. Bills 10.5-point favorites with a total of 47. Both of those right in line with what the look-ahead market had for both of these teams. So the Bills are going to know where they stand for the 1 seed before they take the field for this game. This is if Kansas City wins on Wednesday against the Steelers, the Bills are going to be playing for the 2 seed. There is certainly still incentive for the Bills to go out and win. There is certainly incentive for Josh Allen to push for his first MVP bid. I don't think this is a sit and lie down and rest game for the Bills where they're going to be putting everyone on the bench. That could happen in week 18 if the Chiefs win. But I do start to question as we get later into games now that Allen has these injuries. You have some skill guys not quite 100%. You saw defensive key starters leave the game today. Do we see a full 4 quarters if the Bills are comfortably leading, if the Chiefs win on Wednesday, knowing that, hey, we're in the 2 seed, that's where we're headed? Like, is this a Bills team pushing down the wire to extend the double-digit lead even bigger against the dead Jets team late in the game? I don't get the impression that it is, which would make me a little bit worrisome here as I'm looking at a 10-point spread in this game if I'm thinking about backing the Buffalo Bills. Now, defensively for the Jets, Sauce Gardner left the game again with a hamstring injury. It's like the 4th or 5th time this year he's been unable to finish a game. The way that Jeff Ulbrich has been conservative with his corners, I would be surprised if Gardner's out there again this week or even the rest of the season. I don't get what they're pushing him out there for. Quinnen Williams removed from that defensive line is a mess for run defense. And so if he's not out there again, the Bills, even if they tighten up a bit, are going to be able to run the football. So there is a path here for the Bills to get out and build that lead and have success. But again, it's another game that's tied up here on a Sunday night, relatively so due to some injuries. But I don't want to, if the Chiefs win on Wednesday, I wouldn't want to be holding a Bills -10 ticket, knowing that the incentives on the 2 seed and no longer on the 1 seed. And that's not really conducive to winning games late or expanding double-digit leads late in this spot if they're in that scenario. Carolina on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Bucs were 8.5-point favorites on the look ahead. This is not fully open yet as the Buccaneers just wrapped up. I cannot imagine that this would open back up at 8.5 again. I think I'm questioning whether or not it's a flat 7, the way we're seeing the Panthers continue to fight down the stretch. So wait and see what we get from this game. Obviously, the Panthers are out, but still fighting in terms of a team this is a gotta have it versus a nothing to play for. I would say of all the nothing to play for teams, the Panthers are going to give the best effort the last 2 weeks. I mean, they're playing as hard as any team in contention at the moment, trying to figure out what they have left with Bryce Young. So I wouldn't treat this game the same way, and I would fully expect this to kind of go the way of the Chargers game, where you don't see a premium on the team that's got to have it. It's likely going to be the Buccaneers adjusted down. I don't know if it's going to be a flat 7 or slightly higher. Green Bay on the road at the Minnesota Vikings. Even though this looks like a very competitive game with a whole lot of meaning, not so much. The Packers are locked in. They can't go higher than the 6th seed. They can clinch the wild card berth officially with a win, but I mean, they're going to make the playoffs. They're not going to be higher than the 6th. They've got the Lions and Vikings in front of them, and so they're effectively locked in. Now the Minnesota Vikings, neck and neck with the Lions, competing down the stretch for the 1 seed and the division title. And those two teams will play each other next week, which will go a long way to deciding everything at the top of the NFC. The Detroit Lions do not play until Monday. And so the Lions have the benefit at the top of the NFC of knowing what happens with Minnesota first. Kind of a messy game from that perspective. And when I'm thinking about this matchup and what we're looking at, if we think about the Packers and their sort of trajectory the last couple of weeks, we don't know what they're going to do, obviously, on Monday Night Football tonight or tomorrow, depending when you're listening to this. These two teams played each other way back in week 4 before we really knew the ceiling and what Minnesota was going to be. Minnesota won in a narrow 31-29 win. And that was a game where the Packers at home closed as a 2.5-point favorite. This game in Minnesota had a look-ahead line of Minnesota -1. There's a lot of noise in the Packers rating and what they are, just because of how much variance there's been on the defensive side with takeaways and big plays, on the offensive side with the different ways that we have seen them look. I'm curious to see what we get from the Packers on Monday Night Football and how comfortable that win is against the Saints. I can't see this going to Minnesota -3 unless the Packers really underwhelm on Monday Night Football. Maybe we get a modest cover that sets up an opportunity where the Packers set up as a short dog here. But of the two, with this not being fully open, kind of intrigued here by Green Bay. But again, that'll all depend on how they look on Monday Night Football. Rudy says, Packers scare me a little for some reason. Very good team. I just have weird vibes. There's that word again about them. I kind of like the look of the Packers in this game personally. But again, we don't even know what the number is going to be yet, so that's something to watch for later in the week. Dallas on the road at the Philadelphia Eagles. Completely off the board. This was Eagles -11.5. Jalen Hurts with the concussion. Hard to say how he progresses through protocol. With the Vikings and the Lions atop the NFC and the Eagles dropping the game, I would be surprised if the Eagles go out of their way to rush Hurts back to play in this. I don't know if that's going to be the case because one of those teams is guaranteed to win in week 18 because they play each other. So if you're Philly in this, what's the upside of bringing Hurts back for this game, specifically when you know you're going to need him for the playoff stretch? So perhaps we see him eased back into it through the protocol. It is week 18, so it is tough to kind of gauge how the protocol is going to be enforced. It is very light. I think I've called this week simultaneously week 16 and week 18 at the same time. It is, in fact, week 17. Down the stretch, the protocol is just more of a suggestion than it is an actual application based on what we've seen the last couple seasons. So it's hard to say. If this is a Pickens game, I would expect we see this reopen Philly 6.5, 7. If this is a Hurts game, we won't see this at 11.5. I would not imagine. I would think we see this around 9.5, 10 is what I would think we see when this fully opens up, when there is more news about Hurts later on. Miami on the road at the Cleveland Browns. So we talked about how can you find a way in to back the team that has nothing to play for against a team that's got to have it, because there is certainly here a premium put on the Dolphins from 3 out to 6. The Dolphins win and cover against the 49ers. The Dolphins were faded all week in market at every limit, at every point, at every turn. It was San Francisco money all week long, all the way up to the final close. This is now Miami from 3 out to as high as 6.5 and trending a little bit higher. DTR is atrocious as a quarterback in the NFL. You're not getting worse play out of any QB than you're getting out of him. At 6.5 with Miami, this is a monster number for the Dolphins to be laying on the road, even against DTR and the Browns. And it's one that might potentially tick up a little bit higher yet, too. Monday Night Football, Detroit on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. Detroit from 2.5 out to 3.5. Lions, the game will matter more for them if they see the Vikings win on Sunday against the Green Bay Packers, setting up that big game in Week 18 for the finale, for the division, for the 1 seed. If the Vikings, it's a big game for Detroit either way, but obviously that'll push it a little bit. From 2.5 up to 3.5, San Francisco eliminated. Just like the Miami-Cleveland game, this is another home dog with nothing to play for in a big game against an NFC rival to sorts. Could only look at ways to play the 49ers in this game. Now, the total is a big one at 51.5. Mentioned the Lions' defensive struggles and all of the issues that they had that were masked against the Bears. That was a Bears team that managed to put up 6.5 and 386 total. If what we saw from the 49ers and Debo returning to look a little bit more like Debo happens again, and you have a similar 49ers offensive output, albeit marred by penalties and issues and mistakes in the game against Miami today, man, I see a 4 at DK. The Lions are certainly going to be a very popular side. We've got almost 8 days to go to get to kickoff here. Like, how high is this number going to go? I could never be looking at laying the Lions here at 3.5. I just couldn't do it. I would only be looking at ways to back the 49ers. It's kind of a tough thing to do the way that they have fared down the stretch. But, I mean, we saw the market love them this week, and it didn't come through, and now they're getting a Lions team, and I really see that defense struggling at times. But again, it's very hard to figure out what you're getting from the Niners. So again, it is Sunday night. There's a lot of kind of waffling back and forth. That Sunday night, you're looking at this, you're trying to figure things out. There's so many injuries this week that we don't even have like the day after update on some of these guys. So it's a big question mark and a lot of speculation for this. But as I go through the card and I'm just thinking about games like the Chiefs-Steelers game, very impactful injuries on both sides, makes it a little bit tough to look at. Baltimore-Houston, that to me, with Houston losing Dell and where they sit in the playoffs, and there's not a lot of upside, even if they win, for them to improve, and the Ravens trying to get the division and move up, like that's a number at 4 that I wouldn't be surprised if the Ravens take a little bit of money in that game. Seattle, Chicago certainly profiles like a higher scoring game. Chargers, New England, kind of that reverse of what you would have expected with a got to win versus not. Adjusted down slightly, total getting bashed over because it's another Pats game with these totals flying over. Denver, Cincinnati, those 2 tackles for Cincinnati, massive. I get the totals moving up, but the driver of this is, in my opinion, going to be Burrow and this Bengals offense. So if you think that shows up behind 2 backup tackles potentially, you probably really like the over here. I certainly think Denver is able to run behind that O-line, find success, and Knicks will look comfortable against this defense. It's a matter of what are we getting from the tackle position. Arizona, LA, big number for LA. What do we get from James Conner this week? What is his status going to be for Arizona? Very impactful. Indy and the Giants. Can you trust the Giants to make up their very limited share of the total at home? If you can, you're probably looking at this total as pretty short. It was the same number against a rookie quarterback last week, making his debut. So how are you looking at this being equal? Atlanta, Washington, a 5-point favorite, which looks awfully lofty, but Drake London, Key wide receiver number 1. You have to keep an eye on that too. Vegas, New Orleans off the board. Tennessee, Jacksonville could be a completely wide open game. Jets, Buffalo, tough. Bells will know what happened Wednesday with the Chiefs. Can you lay double digits with them if the Chiefs win, knowing that the Bills will not be able to get the 1 seed and effectively locked in? Are they going to be willing to play guys who are banged up later into the game, looking forward to the playoffs? Carolina, Tampa Bay, not fully open yet, but that's going to be adjusted down in a big way. Green Bay, Minnesota, again, looking at that, not fully open yet. Curious to see what happens Monday night, but certainly initially kind of intrigued by Green Bay. Dallas, Philly, waiting to see Jalen Hurts before we get a number. And then the last two, like, is there a way in to back Cleveland? And is there a way in to back San Francisco? Because especially that Miami price is pretty steep, to put it lightly, in that game. All right, hour and 15. Hopefully this sets you up as well. We could very well have a release tomorrow morning at raspicks.com/NFL. Home stretch, $100 for the rest of the season. The price has been prorated down. Paid service releases for subscribers, 43.31 into 58.1% this season. Would love to have you in for the home stretch if you were not already in. We'll have what I would expect probably 4 more releases as the minimum now through the Super Bowl. Hope this sets you up for week 17 best it can. I'll be back later in the week, either Friday or Saturday. I'll see how the sort of attention goes with this video and what kind of numbers are showing. I'll pick one of those days. No podcast, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, Thursday morning for sure, as Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day have just historically been write-offs for viewership, and you guys all are dealing with family, friends, and beyond for everything going on. So I'll play it by ear. Again, if you're not subscribed to the channel and you hit the subscribe button, you'll get a notification right away when I go live, so you will not miss anything. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. I hope you have an awesome holiday week. I hope you have a very Merry Christmas with friends and family, and you enjoy the football games between now and the next time that I chat with you guys. Have a great night. Have a great day, and enjoy the week, everybody. Chat to you soon.